Hello there, beautiful human. My name is RidersDX and welcome to my channel where today I was just brushing up on my trigonometry knowledge because I'm gonna need that added brain power to sort through the mess of feelings we're sinking into today. You see, we got the Star Wars and Harry Potter hybrids of the video game industry, the Storybook games of a certain blue hedgehog, and I'm sure that blue hedgehog is very obvious to even the most simple-minded of imbeciles. These games are going to require dissection on the level of neural brain surgeons to truly determine their place in the Sonic video game catalog. Are these treasure chests buried at sea, or oxygen vacuums in our atmosphere? Let's put on our reading enhancements and read on. I think we're all very aware of what Sonic the Hedgehog was during the time the Storybook series came out. Everything and anything. From petty rivalries, hedgehog enthusiasts, and ports that make me question life. The franchise was divided into numerous identities, each trying to recover a piece to the puzzle in uniting the franchise and bringing it back to its former glory after many difficult adventures. And while many of these factions felt like fraternities on a campus, i.e. complete polar opposites fighting against each other as publicly as possible to assert dominance, the Storybook series felt like a mutual that was trying to hold everything together. These two games share lots of common themes and structures in what is called the Storybook games, which one acknowledged proudly while the other was all, I don't know her. The basic gist is that Sonic gets sucked into a classic storybook and must maneuver through the adventures that the narrative provides to protect both the world and his own, as not doing so would lead to a hostile takeover or a very twisted version of the story. I have to say, without going too deeply into either plot, the basis of the spin-off series was pretty sick. It would have allowed Sonic to experiment with so many different locations and themes in ways that just wouldn't make sense for most of the titles. So it truly is a shame we only got 2 games out of this ordeal, but nonetheless, we did get 2 titles, and I have many thoughts about them. I think the best way to go about doing this is actually to focus on each game individually, and then coming back to both at the end to determine what the better game is. This is probably wise as I tend to get lost in thought a lot, that's why I never go outside. But without further ado, let's begin our story in the Arabian Nights. Sonic and the Secret Rings was codenamed Sonic Wildfire when it was first announced at E3 2006, and I was also in 6th grade, so yeah. This game was very interesting for me personally, as it not only promised something new for Sonic, but it also teased the Nintendo Wii in general. Codenamed Revolution, there was still a lot of mystery surrounding the console given the controller's unique design. While Nintendo teased the device with their own games, I was a hardcore Sega nerd back then, so Wildfire was the main title that would introduce me to some of the things this thingamajig could do. I finally got the game later in 2007, fresh off the heels of Sonic 06, and looking back on it, I don't think I knew what to expect from this game. I didn't think Sonic 06 was all that bad at the time. In my mind, I think I was acting out towards the game's critics and haters because of all the garbage Sonic was going through at the moment. So I remember thinking about Secret Rings in a very positive light. It turns out though, I was actually falling in love with the game. I found my review that I did on GameSpot back in 2007 and I gave it a 9 out of 10. Let's take a look then, shall we? So this is my true and hopefully forever opinion on Sonic's debut on the Wii. We'll see about that. The story is very ancient, like many recent Sonic games like Sonic's debut game on the 360 and PS3, which didn't do so well. Also, Sonic's new game that was just announced, Sonic Rush Adventures, sounds to have an ancient feel too. So I guess we're just gonna live with ancient themed stories for a while. I feel ancient reading this. The control scheme makes the game with one of the most simple control schemes. The water in Sand Oasis looks very real, a lot like real water. Party mode is the multiplayer mode for the game. Sonic Team decided to make a party mode since party games tend to be fun on the Wii, so yeah, they decided to. I'll leave a link in the description box below if you're really curious as to how that review turned out, but hopefully this review is just better by default. Despite how much I love this game, I haven't touched it in 10 years. Except for the party mode, my god, I love myself a false sense of social interaction. By the way, I did a review on that separately, so feel free to check that out in the top right corner. So will my opinion stay the same, or will it drastically change? Let's check it out. I will say my opinion definitely has not changed about its overall presentation. One of the things I immediately fell in love with when it comes to Secret Rings was its cutscenes. It's not surprising that this game was budgeted considering the fact that the only reason for its existence was because they couldn't port Sonic 06 over to the Wii. So I wouldn't be surprised if this was the reason they settled on a more stylized approach to telling the story, but I have to say I love it. It really helps to paint the canvas of this game and help you realize that this isn't a typical Sonic game. You're entering another world's stories and will have to play to their rules, utilizing some of the series staples you've grown to love in terms of moves. I mean, sure, it would have been nice to have a fully animated cutscenes, but I have a feeling some of the charm of these scenes might have actually been lost if they did that. You know the saying that a picture tells 1,000 words? I think this game is living proof of that. I would argue that these cutscenes are more animated than anything in Sonic 06. It's a big reason why I felt the story of Secret Rings is one of the strongest in the Sonic series. But another reason for me is the bond between Sonic and Shara. The story essentially revolves around these two traveling the world of the Arabian Nights in search of the 7 world rings, in hopes that they hold the key to stopping Razor Jin, the genie of the lamp who wants to rewrite the story, which could lead to him entering Sonic's world and causing mass chaos. In terms of structure, the story isn't the most interesting, but I really enjoyed the dialogue between Sonic and Shara, as I felt both characters grew in some way throughout the campaign, Shara especially. The world rings in particular were a great plot device because each one was associated with a certain emotion which would trigger certain conversations between the two. Sometimes it feels awkwardly pasted in, but I overall enjoyed how the game tried to develop the two characters in this manner. I always enjoyed seeing other faces from Sonic's world show up in this game playing characters within the Arabian Nights. It's funny because they all retain parts of their personality, even Eggman, who plays a king that isn't trying to take over the world, like what? These appearances led to some of the more lighthearted moments of the game.
Whew, okay, so about the fire genie then. Why not just try splashing some water on him?
It didn't work.
The game itself looks fine enough for the time it came out, but I do have to criticize the environments, as looking back at them, they definitely ooze the aura of forgettable. They're not terrible looking by any means, but there just isn't anything interesting about them that really stands out to me. Night Palace is probably the best looking one, just based on the concept alone. Running throughout a floating palace with all these different portals to different locations was pretty cool. The music is a bit of a mixed bag too, as there are some good tunes here, but I think the main issue with much of the music is that it tends to be repetitive. Part of this is due to the composition, but another cause can be attributed to the game's use of the tracks. I mean, if you insist on playing the main theme song every 10 seconds, it doesn't matter if your song's repetitive or not, it's going to sound repetitive. The fact though that a lot of these songs just spew the same 2 to 3 lines over and over again is a huge reason as to why they get repetitive. It's why the tracks that don't have vocals in them sound so great in comparison. I will admit though, I still get chills listening to Evil Foundry's track, mainly because of a certain YouTuber. But now it's time to talk about the main point of contention for many people when it comes to Secret Rings, and that is the gameplay. So, I loved this game as a kid. I had a lot of fun with the motion controls, and I also think I was just relieved to play a Sonic game that wasn't covered in glitches and bugs. But playing this game a whole decade later, I had the exact opposite mindset. I honestly am dumbfounded as to how I found any of this to be fun. Secret Rings feels like you're controlling Sonic as if he had oil and glue simultaneously splattered on the bottom of his shoes. I don't know, but they managed to make Sonic unbearably slow and clunky at points of the game, yet uncontrollable and slippery at other times. And to be honest, it's not exactly due to the game's motion controls. This may be controversial to say, but I think the controls respond perfectly fine. My main issues come from just how generally awkward this game feels. I won't drone on about the details, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with these issues, but I'll just say this game even managed to screw up jumping. But to really appreciate just how much lost potential there is through the game's controls, here's a central point to tie it all together. The game becomes so much more fun once you have all your skills equipped, which is a fundamental problem with the structure of Secret Rings. You see, this game experimented with an RPG-influenced upgrade system, where you earn skill points which helps you to earn new skills that you can equip depending on what level Sonic is at. Upgrade systems are not new to Sonic games. Both adventure games gave Sonic and his friends new moves throughout the campaign, and Sonic Heroes had a level up system restricted to the stages specifically. But the difference between those games and Secret Rings are the moves themselves. You see, while in the adventure games you're given all the basic necessities to progress through the levels from the very beginning, with upgrades just being new moves to add to your repertoire, Secret Rings opts to give you primarily modifications to your current playstyle. Some upgrades you can equip include more responsive braking, better turning, increased movement speed, longer range of homing attacks, etc. To put it all together, the upgrades in Secret Rings serve to make the game a more fun experience. So essentially, you need to work to get a fun game. This is okay to an extent, as the classic games were structured similarly in a way that once you master the stage design, you would be rewarded with being able to complete them in record time with minimal loss of lives. However, the difference between those games and Secret Rings is that stripped of those skills, you still have a pretty fun and responsive game to play, and it's enjoyable to get better at the game. With Secret Rings, the game is an absolute chore to play for most part, as you don't have any of these upgrades to make the game more playable, so as a result, you have this sluggish fictitious, slippery, sorry excuse for a hedgehog to maneuver these environments with. It truly is a shame because I replayed some levels after defeating the final boss and actually found myself having a decent time, but no regular player or even a fan in the right mind would be okay with playing through these miserable first hours of the game to eventually get to this point. Beyond that, the level design doesn't do the game many favors either. I think Sand Oasis and perhaps Night Palace are the best designed levels due to their more open nature, which allows the game to be more forgiving towards the game's controls, but most of the levels have corridor layouts that are boring to run through and also awkward object placements. I seriously got so tired of constantly braking to avoid 100 of spike balls they throw in your face here. The game also has a lot of padding attached to it, as there truly are just 8 main levels to run through here. Once you finish a level though, you have to complete various missions attached to that level that are basically just shorter segments of the same level but with dumb objectives like break 5 jars, don't break any jars, finish with 5 rings, break 5 dinosaur eggs. The game does have its bright spots overall, but I feel like it just tried too hard to incorporate the features of a Wii Remote, which admittedly weren't all that ironed out industry-wide with this game practically being a launch title. It's like they felt like they had to make something completely different from Sonic games beforehand because of the new technology, when maybe they would have been much better off trying to create something tried and true since it is ultimately a spin-off title. This game shares a similarity with 06 in a way that it tried to be this innovative masterpiece, but ultimately had a vision bigger than its capabilities. So with that being said, will Black Knight remedy all the faults of Secret Rings? Well, Black Knight was initially reviewed at 2008's Tokyo Game Show, and it's safe to say that reception was pretty mixed. After the recent years we've had with Sonic, people weren't really sure what to think with each new game announcement. I personally have very little recollection of how I felt about Black Knight's announcement, which means I probably wasn't all that excited for it. But then I remembered it was announced months before Unleashed was released, which I was immensely excited for, so it makes sense in my mind. Black Knight never managed to make a huge impression on me, even after Unleashed came and went. I will give the game some slack though, because it was my freshman year of high school and I was stupidly trying to be all platformers are so lame. I eventually picked the game up and all I can remember is just immensely hating it. I hated it more than exams, Brussels sprouts, physical activity, you name it. I even sold it a few months down the line, but then I eventually bought it again because I figured out how dumb I was for thinking I'd be fine with selling a Sonic game no matter how disappointing it was. I guess I was just getting fed up with how inconsistent Sonic was getting at this point that Black Knight just seemed like an extension of that. So playing the game again after all these years, what do I think about the title now? Well, I will say just like Secret Rings, my impression of the presentation has not changed a bit. It's amazing. The game opts for that same storybook feel that Secret Rings incorporated, but it's a lot more expressive with its use compared to the former. There's a wider use of colors and moving parts, and it's just a few steps closer to actual animated cutscenes. I can't tell which method I prefer honestly, as I think both games have a certain charm to their cutscenes that I love. Secret Rings, while not being as animated, really embraced that storytelling influence with its cutscenes that I really enjoyed. Black Knight is a little bit closer to the traditional medium. I think it barely wins out for me due to its more lively look, but I don't want to undersell Secret Rings in this department at all. In regards to the actual story though, obviously there's a similar structure to Secret Rings in that Sonic is pulled into a story, this time being the one of King Arthur, and has the mission of taking down the king to save the kingdom. At first you think that Molina is going to be this game's equivalent to Shara, but actually, that title is much better suited to Caliburn, the talking sword that accompanies you throughout most of your missions. I found him to be very charming overall and a welcome change from Secret Rings. I really enjoyed the banter he and Sonic had, and it made for entertaining and lighthearted moments in the story. I will say though, as a result of the more lighthearted approach, I did not get as invested in these two as I did with Sonic and Shara, especially since there were very minimal cutscenes with just the two of them. One thing this game definitely does more of compared to Secret Rings though, is utilizing Sonic's friends throughout the story. Knuckles, Shadow, Blaze for instance play knights that serve King Arthur, and you get to battle each of them before ultimately working with them in the end. I just wanted to say I'm so glad Blaze is finally in a story beyond the Rush games where she's adequately used and isn't involved in any ridiculous plot holes. We really don't deserve such a queen. Tails and Amy also show up in this game through supporting roles. While I do appreciate the better use of Sonic characters, I couldn't help but feel that I was more invested in Secret Rings' story as it felt simpler and they were trying to develop characters first and foremost during it. I felt that Black Knight tried to incorporate too many characters and plot points into its short story and thus could not flesh any of them out to a satisfying level. This is extremely apparent once you go defeat King Arthur and find out the twist of the story. I found myself asking, wait, I'm already here? The pacing just felt so haphazard and nothing could sink in. Black Knight has a lot of great ideas that very well could have made an amazing mainline story, but its strength ended up being its weakness, in that the story just could not present itself in the manner it deserved under such a short campaign. It definitely could have used an extra hour or two to really just breathe. One aspect of Black Knight I do prefer though is its music. The soundtrack to this game is absolutely out of this world. Jun Sen-yu, who worked on many Sonic games in the past such as the Adventure games and Heroes, returns for this title and he definitely knocks it out of the park. While there's less diversity here here compared to Secret Rings, the soundtrack really didn't need it and in fact was able to make the experience feel much more cohesive than Secret Rings. I mean, there was just a huge shift in musicality between Pirate Storm and Skeleton Dome that always felt iffy to me, but almost all the tracks in Black Knight had this intense, fast-paced feel that harkens back to the adventure games, but with a strong string influence to warp you to the setting of this kingdom. But you know what the real highlight of the music is? The acoustic renditions of the cheesiest Sonic themes. I don't know why I'm so obsessed with these tracks, but I just think they sound so gorgeous on your ears and put me in a good mood every time they come up on Spotify. They're also regular tracks on my productivity playlist, with Tails' violin theme in particular being a favorite of mine. I will say though, the fact that the music in Black Knight isn't so diverse does exacerbate how bland the environments can look. I know I commented on how Secret Rings had bland looking environments, but I think Black Knight looks even less inspiring in comparison. Every environment you traverse through here has that same grimy old look to it. The only level that has any semblance of daylight to it are the plains, but that has to be one of the most boring looking levels here due to how grassy it is. At least Secret Rings took you up to a sky and a night palace at some point. Everything in Black Knight is just so mundane and forgettable. But I think we've put off the ultimate defining factor in what game is better long enough. What's it like to play Sonic with a sword? I hated this playstyle with passion when I first got the game. I hated it more than the Werehog, Big the Cat, and Knuckles in Sonic 06 combined. But do I have the same burning passion to see the ultimate downfall of this gameplay style all these years later? No. In fact, I kinda liked it. The whole reason I wanted to make this video is because I was reading all these tweets and comments and videos on how people preferred Black Knight over Secret Rings, thinking that it was such a better game. And I just remember like painfully hating Black Knight like so much and preferring Secret Rings so much over it. And so I really wanted to dive into both games just to see if maybe for some reason I just felt that way back then, but I would feel completely differently now. And that turned out to be the case. Playing it again all these years later, I really don't understand what it was I hated so much. Now, I'm not going to sit here and praise Black Knight to no end for its mechanics, as I'm still not a fan of its gameplay overall, but admittedly it's not as miserable as I once touted it to be. The game works, and it doesn't feel like you're fighting its controls half the time like I was in Secret Rings. The addition of the nunchuck and a much more simplified method of jumping are immense improvements that honestly should have been in the series from the very beginning. It's amazing how the addition of things you had taken for granted can make an experience so much more bearable. Sonic still has an upgrade system, but his base movement is good enough to get you started with the game. The upgrade system itself is a lot more simplicity to Secret Rings and is based off of the amount of followers you earn after each mission. If I'm being completely honest though, I didn't care at all about how it all worked and just played the game without really touching it, and I was perfectly fine. So it's there if you want to explore the detail, but I personally couldn't care less, and I'm glad the game allowed that. Although there is one mission where you're forced to give rings to the locals, and all I could think about was how this was legit more boring than fishing with Big.
Donate to the children's fund? Why? What have children ever done for me?
So yes, there are massive improvements that just overall make this experience an obvious step up from Secret Rings. However, my issues with the game before still hold up, as the sword play is incredibly repetitive and boring after a few missions of utilizing it. It just isn't fun wagging a hand over and over again to slash all the enemies the exact same way, no matter what weapons they may be holding. One thing that Black Knight does that's really cool is that you can also play as Knuckles, Shadow, and Blaze, whom all have slight variations in the movesets. However, there isn't anything to write home about with those either. I will say though, Knuckles is able to glide, and I love using this to skip past enemies when my arm got sore. It doesn't help that the game sword just flies by you, as I was already battling King Arthur in the final boss by the second hour of my playthrough. The game just felt so unsatisfying to play that I've barely left an impression. I can appreciate them trimming the fat that Secret Rings pushed onto you, but they didn't give anything substantial to replace that, and thus you're left with a very bare bones experience that's over before you even know it. You can tell Black Knight was legitimately trying to fix the faults of the original, but I just felt like it went a little bit too far in some of the directions. And so ultimately, which game comes out on top? The answer is not as obvious as you might think. So before I put these games into balance and determine which one I prefer, I wanted to take a moment to praise a couple more things these games do so well. Both games have an extras menu that's filled to the brim with content. Like, it's actually pretty crazy how much stuff is here. Of course, you can play tons of music and watch back all your favorite cutscenes, but there's also tons of concept art, developer commentary, and even videos showing off earlier versions of cutscenes in development. Secret Rings definitely has more stuff, but Black Knight still has a good amount of content. Man, I wish every game would do stuff like this. It's a great incentive to keep playing the game to unlock more extras. I'm not sure why the Storybook series are the best games in the franchise when it comes to this, but all other Sonic games should take notes. Another thing that I will say, which would probably cause my 13-year-old self to attempt to punch and perfectly fail, is how good the voice acting is in these games, specifically Sonic. But the cast definitely began to better understand the characters, and I just felt everyone nailed their performances in both of these games. Sonic was by far my favorite, however, as I think by Black Knight, Jason truly struck that balance between cheesiness and seriousness that I felt Ryan was able to obtain. There's just a great sense of playfulness yet urgency in Sonic's delivery, and Jason was able to effortlessly drift between them in both games. Not to mention the writers got his playful attitude just right as well. It's pretty surprising that I'm saying this because I legit hated this man with a passion, which was stupid, absolutely ridiculously dumb. He was just doing his job, and it was completely immature of me to blame a company's decision on the voice actor. But Jason definitely worked hard to improve his craft, and I 100% believe these games are his peak performance. You folks have no idea how much I hate the 4Kids cast. You know, I read all these comments and tweets from people saying how much they love the 4Kids voice actors, and if you show me these comments when I was in like middle school, I would have thought that these people were like crazy or just like delusional, because I hated these voice actors with all my heart. Sonic Heroes was my very first Sonic game, and I fell in love with all those voice actors, and so to have it change completely to the 4Kids cast right after was really disappointing to me, and I hated the voice actors so much. In fact, I actually remember my very first review that I ever made that was in video form was actually of this game. I remember it now, and it just had like a still image of Secret Rings, and it was just like 5 minutes of me hating on the 4Kids voice actors. You know, it was actually the first time I think I ever swore, because I think as a kid you feel like the only legitimate way to show anger is to swear, because kids. As I was writing this review, I realized actually just how much these games got right. These games have some of the best presentation aspects I've ever seen in a Sonic game, along with a wealth of extras that you can unlock. There's just something so charming about seeing Sonic enter these worlds you would never see otherwise in a Sonic game, and I love the creativity and originality these games exude. Despite all the gameplay issues I've discussed, I still had a genuinely good time traversing through both of these games due to just about everything else carrying the weight. Perhaps I just really appreciate the potential this series had, and I'm no stranger to doing that when it comes to Sonic the Hedgehog. I love this franchise, but it clearly has an uphill battle in terms of delivering quality titles. But due to my relentless love for these games, it's hard for me to settle on this game is trash. I have to delve into these titles and make an honest attempt at seeing what about this game was great before completely writing it off. And I found a lot to love about both of these games, just not the main attraction. Now that I think about it, this series could be a really nice setup for a Sonic show or movie series. Just some things to think about, Sega. But okay, if we really have to determine what the better title is, the answer seems pretty obvious. Black Knight is the clear winner for me in terms of gameplay. It's just a much less frustrating adventure overall compared to Secret Rings. I'd always rather a game trim out the fat and BS and give a relatively short experience rather than elongating it and making it a miserable adventure. But yet, I still have this strange appreciation for Secret Rings I simply don't have with Black Knight, and it's the most confounding thing to me. Black Knight did almost everything better than Secret Rings, but I still find myself finally looking back at the former with those rose-tinted glasses. This may have something to do with when these games came out. When Secret Rings came out, I was still pretty optimistic about the franchise. I had a positive view somewhat of 06 despite all the criticism, and Secret Rings seemed like a huge step up from that game in terms of just not being broken. Meanwhile, Black Knight came out when my patience began to run thin with the franchise, and I was just tired of Sega and Sonic Team repeating the same mistakes they've been making for years now. Thus, my initial opinions on these games were just so polarizing. I can comfortably declare Black Knight as being a better game. It has a great soundtrack, beautiful cutscenes, and gameplay that just doesn't make you want to scream every minute of the way. However, if there's one thing about Secret Rings that I'll forever put above Black Knight, it's probably its fearlessness. Secret Rings was not afraid to take risks. It was hell-bent on putting Sonic in a completely new setting with a brand new game mechanic no one had seen from him before. And you know what? I can have an appreciation for this ambition even if it turned out to be not so great. Black Knight feels like it tries to pedal back on so many of the ideas Secret Rings had. It just feels like a very safe title comparison. It is better to have a safe game that's at least decent compared to the other possibility, but Black Knight even incorporated swordplay in the least innovative way possible. And I don't know, this is something about the Sonic franchise as of late that somewhat concerns me. Most Sonic games we've we've been getting since Colors have opted to play things extremely safe in comparison to past titles, making Sonic the only playable character, simplifying the narrative to no end, and overall just very little experimentation. Although some titles did do some and unfortunately didn't have the best results. But I don't know, man, I kinda miss how bold Sonic used to be, right down to the way his character emoted in these two games compared to what we've been getting. It felt like the people behind these games still really believed in this franchise and wanted to take big risks to get it back up to where it was. But nowadays it doesn't feel like they have that faith anymore. We've got less games overall, with the games we are getting seeming like a huge step down from before in terms of scope. And this saddens me as a Sonic fan, as I think the franchise still has so much it can bring to the industry. Sonic games aren't being made anymore with the genuine belief it can go above and beyond your typical run-of-the-mill platformer. They don't have that spark, that ambition that even spin-off titles like these two had. With these games, there's really not much I can write home about in terms of gameplay, but I enjoyed the scope and imagination that I just don't see in Sonic games nowadays. Let me know in the comment section below how you ultimately feel about these games. Looking back on these titles, I have to say I'm pretty fond of them and I'm glad that they are in the franchise, even if they aren't all that fun to play. I think Sega and Sonic Team could take a few cues from these games. Just please stay away from the motion controls, my arm depends on it. And that, my friends, is why Secret Rings and Blacklight are the most confusing games in this franchise. What the Shout out to Andrew Coughlin, The Nerd Corner, Team Route Sonic Gamer, Shara Rainfall, Rudy Star Pony, MX Sanctus Belader, Blitz Productions, Trash Q, Abraham Muter, and Mass Muter. If you'd like to become a patron or YouTube member, get access to a whole bunch of different perks, including seeing this video early and exclusive access to a bloopers reel, then please check out the links in the description box below. But alright, this is Riders, riding out.